Once you know how to teach a standard and how you plan to assess it, you can write a learning objective that ties it all together. So our objective for our lesson about objectives is to be able to write a clear, student-friendly 4-part objective through learning the proper parts of strong objectives. And we'll do this through talking about what objectives are and why they're important, the 4 components that go into having strong objectives, and how assessments are correlated. So what is an objective? Well, it's the target or the goal or the roadmap for a lesson, whether that's for a single day, a single week, or a single lesson. Having an objective is important because it gives clarity and direction to let students know what they will do and how they will demonstrate learning. It does this for scholars because objectives should always be posted. Often, teachers think of objectives as something only needed for single lesson plans, but really, they should be student-friendly. And since they are, good objectives are both teacher and student-facing. This means you can use the same objective in any of your planning docs that you have to turn in, as well as on your board and in your student-facing documents. Finally, objectives are aligned to standards. They identify the content, and they identify the assessment designed to check for mastery of the standard. So there are 4 components to a good learning objective. First, the skills. This is the level of cognition, and in standards, these are your verbs. Second, the concepts. Concepts are what students need to know. In standards, these are your nouns and adjectives. What you want to do is use the language from the standard for these components in your objective. In order to identify these components, standards need to be unpacked and broken down, which you should have learned about from the previous video. The third thing objectives have is context. Context identifies the content that's being used to teach the skills and the knowledge. It's your text or your activity or the problem type for practicing the skill. And finally, strong objectives have a by or through statement, which is your assessment. It's the way that the skill is being measured. And this could be as simple as an exit ticket or as complex as an exam or an essay or a final project, all depending on what phase of a unit you're in. Either way, it's how you're measuring the execution of the skill. Here's an example using the SAT reading standard IITE. It's already been unpacked for you. You can see that the skills and the concepts are separated. What does the standard say students should be able to do, and what does it say students should know? If students don't know the content, then they won't be able to perform the skill. Key understandings are determined based on the skills and concepts. What are the baseline skills students need in order to perform the overall skill? This helps to give language for the first 2 components of that learning objective, like I said. The third component of that objective, the context, is going to be specific to your subject and unit. Like I said, that's what you're using to teach the skills and concepts. And then the same thing goes for that 4th component, how you're measuring. Through unpacking the standard, I've also predetermined ways that the standard can be taught authentically. For this standard, I know I need a grade level text to connect to, and I can either give students multiple choice options, or I can have them select evidence from a text and write about it, which would then be a higher level of cognitive work. I always recommend you have a healthy mix of multiple choice versus application-based assessments, and you do this through any type of writing projects or speaking assignments. So when we look at the objective that's connected to this standard, as you can see, this objective states that students will identify, which is your skill, best text evidence, your concept, using letter from Birmingham jail, the context, by using given evidence choices and justifying the choice, your by statement. So this objective has all 4 components of a strong objective, and it fully aligns to the standard. It's generally best to create the assessment before the objective, but no matter which you create first and second, it's important that they match. If they don't, you're going to need to revise one or the other. So your standard, assessment, and objective should all align, which means that they're going to all have very similar language across them. And ultimately, when it comes to the objective, it's the thing that ties everything together for the lesson. So let's look at an example of that objective connected to an assessment. So in the assessment, students have to select best evidence from choices, and the objective says they have to identify text evidence. So this puts the skill and the concept together. The assessment states that they will be given a claim from the text, and that matches the objective, which the text is letter from Birmingham jail. And finally, students are asked to write 1 sentence to justify their choice and 1 sentence to explain why other choices are not as strong, which also matches the statement in the objective. And you can now see that my assessment aligns with my objective, and since we already aligned the objective to the standard and the assessment to the standard, we know that all 3 things are connected. One last thing to remember about learning objectives is that you should reiterate it throughout your materials. The more you refer to it, the more your students will see it as they progress through their work. And that means the more the goal is going to stand out, so students can continue driving toward it. Now that you've created an assessment and written a strong objective to connect the assessment and the standard and the content all together, you can actually go about starting to plan the rest of your lesson.